wisdom. Who can fathom the depth of your love? You are beautiful beyond description, majesty enthroned above. And I stand in awe of you. I stand in awe of you. Holy God, to whom all praise is due, I stand in awe of you. Let us pray. Father in heaven, we thank you for the amazing just blessings we have through you. We do stand in awe of you. We are amazed by how you have blessed us, not just with physical blessings, but more importantly with the spiritual blessings we need. We thank you for a church family. We thank you for your word to guide us, but most of all, we thank you for your Son, which died for us so that we can have salvation available to us and receive grace. And we just pray that we will be able to share that message of the gospel with the community and world around us, and that we'll be able to show each other in the world grace, and that we'll be able to just help them to come to understand how your plan is what's amazing. Your ways is what we need to stand in awe of. So we just pray that you be with us as we go to Bible class and help us to have the focus to find your will for us so we can be amazed and in awe of it. And it's in Jesus' name we say this prayer. Amen.
We're working our way through this workbook of Living a Life That Matters. This is the second part of this. And we're going to be looking at verses in 1 Samuel. So if you'd like to turn over to 1 Samuel, chapter 14. 14, 1-4. And then starting in verse 6. That's 1 Samuel, the 14th chapter, starting in verse 6. Then Jonathan said to the young man who was carrying his armor, "Come and let us cross over to the garrison of these uncircumcised. Perhaps the Lord will work for us, for the Lord is not restrained to save by many or by few." His armor-bearer said to him, "Do all that is in your heart, turn yourself and hear, I am with you, according to your desire." Then Jonathan said, "Behold, we will cross over to the men and reveal ourselves to them. If they say to us, 'Wait until we come to you,' then we will stand in our place and not go up to them. But if they say, 'Come up to us,' then we will go up, for the Lord has given them into our hands, and this shall be the sign to us." When both of them revealed themselves to the garrison of the Philistines said, "Behold, Hebrews are coming out of the holes where they have hidden themselves." So the men of the garrison hailed Jonathan and his armor-bearer and said, "Come up to us, and we will tell you something." And Jonathan said to his armor-bearer, "Come up after me, for the Lord has given them into the hands of Israel." Then Jonathan climbed up on his hands and feet with his armor-bearer behind him, and they fell before Jonathan, and his armor-bearer put some to death after him. That first slaughter which Jonathan and his armor-bearer made was about 20 men within about a half furrow in an acre of land. And there was a trembling in the camp, in the field, and among all the people. Even the garrison and the raiders trembled, and the earth quaked, so that it became a great trembling. Today, we're looking at attempting to live heroically, and we're looking at the life of Jonathan. You know, the author of this particular section is talking about his wife, and that, people will come up to her and say, nice to meet you. My name's, Sam. Oh, yes, we've met before. Really? What's your name? Regina. Regina, Glenn Newton's wife. Oh, yes, now I remember. The author here is saying in 25 years of his ministry, his wife has had to do this 100 times, seemingly thousands of times, because people know him, but can't seem to quite place her. And at first she kind of chuckled about it, but then it gets old. It gets old because nobody likes having their identity attached to somebody else. A child does not like to be known exclusively as Regina's son, nor does a spouse like to be known as somebody's wife. The fact is that his wife has done some amazing things in the kingdom and has a beautiful identity all her own. It's just difficult to see in his long shadow. So imagine, another story like this. It's good to meet you. My name's Glenn. Oh, yes, we've met before. Really? What's your name? Jonathan. Jonathan, David's best friend. Oh, yes, now I remember. It's hard to separate David. Jonathan kind of gets lost in the background. He kind of just disappears into the background of the story. And yet lots of people, lots of ministers like to preach about David. This gentleman here, Glenn Newton, he's preached about David plenty of times, in different locations. He's actually written a couple of these type of workbooks about, 1 Samuel. And he was saying that he was working on writing a book about 1 Samuel that came across Jonathan again. And he remembered Jonathan as a kid with the big flannel board, and you put the little figure up beside David as his friend. Well, but Jonathan is much more than David's friend. Jonathan had his own identity. It's a beautiful and heroic identity. It's sometimes difficult to see it in David's shadow. It's believed that Jonathan was about 30 years old when he's first introduced in 1 Samuel. He was of the tribe of Benjamin, a tribe noted for its heroes and warriors. Jonathan was a prince. He was the son of Saul, the son of the first king of Israel. As a prince, it is likely that Jonathan would have had access to higher education, better food, better teachers. So he'd been skilled in war, lived at the royal court. He had great leadership abilities, and the people looked up to him. As a prince, there's every indication that had the kingdom, God not stripped the kingdom away from Saul, that Jonathan would have been the next king. Yet, because of Saul's unfaithfulness, it never happened. Instead, Jonathan is mostly remembered as a loyal friend to David. Jonathan certainly was a friend to David, but he was so much more than that. When we're introduced to Jonathan, we find Saul's army unarmed and powerless. Jonathan was faced with a difficult decision. On one hand, he was a son of King Saul. He loved his father and wanted to be at his side. On the other hand, Jonathan was a man of principle, of faith. He basically, if we go back to what we have read here, 1 Samuel 14, starting in verse 6, Jonathan and his armor bearer make a plan to go to at least defeat some of the Philistines. Nothing had changed in the circumstances of the invasion or what seemed to be impossible odds for victory. In fact, it seems like, we're having to read through this carefully, but it seems like that the Philistines are getting ready for one more push. And then they're just going to wipe Israel out completely. Just one more push to push Israel off. And the soldiers knew they would see no mercy. Saul would either be killed or made a slave. And all of Israel would be part of the land of the Philistines. So look what Jonathan does. Jonathan and his armor bearer make a plan. Jonathan's talking to his armor bearer and says, look, if the Philistines come, if they tell us to come up to them, then that's the sign God has given them to us. We don't read that God had revealed that to him. His faith apparently was strong enough that that's what he believed or what he had decided. Jonathan had faith to believe God for a miracle. It doesn't take a lot of people to do the work of the Lord. It takes a few good, faithful people who will believe God and go forth with hope in their hearts. God does the rest. Jonathan and his armor bearer walked into the enemy's camp, waited for God to give them the sign, and then attacked. I mean, yes.
I think that's the key to the whole thing. What he did is it shows he was like David, very much so, in that he trusted in God.
Mm-hmm.
He had better common sense to go up and take on the Philistines, just him and his armor bearer. But he saw what could be accomplished with God. I mean, David was an example of that.
Yeah.
And so, he had that same faith that David had in trusting in God. And when he, he did sort of like Gideon. He's sort of proposition guy. He says, if this happens, then I know this is all right from us to go. And if the other happens, then it won't. And so he listened, and the answer came back, and he trusted, and paid off.
Well, I like history. Everybody knows that. It's no big secret. But, there are quotes from people who were in the past master swordsmen. And they go, the best swordsman in the world can fight any other swordsman. Best swordsman in the world can fight the two best swordsmen. Even the best swordsman can't fight 3 men at one time. And here's Jonathan. Jonathan ends up killing 20. And 2 men surrounded by an innumerable host, but with God on their side, were victorious. Now, I'm sure there's probably been plenty of lessons. I don't remember one, but that doesn't mean anything. That there are plenty of lessons taught out of 1 Samuel 14. But the Philistines had a big horde. How did killing 20 men matter 1 iota drop in the bucket? Look what it is. Look what it says. It says that there was a trembling in the camp and in the field and among all the people. Jonathan, his armor bearer, in doing this, literally the fear of God into the Philistines. And we're like, we don't want any part of this. And that it became such a deal. Yeah.
The Pharisees probably thought one man should do this, then the others they can come into camp.
Exactly. What if one man could do this much, what does the rest of Saul's army going to do? And down in verse 16, Saul's watchmen in Gibeah of Benjamin looked, and behold, the multitude melted away, and they were here and there. You know? And the point is that Saul's army here is melting away, is disappearing, because they're losing hope, they're losing faith. So Saul has the Ark of the Covenant brought, and he's talking to the priest. And there was just, if you look down through verse 20, that they came to the battle, and there was such a confusion. The Philistines are defeated. So, as we read down through this chapter, Jonathan's off fighting his father's battles. Saul foolishly ordered that no one eat any food until his enemies were avenged. Okay, that's motivation. I like to eat. Telling me I can't eat till I get the homework done or my room cleaned. And when I was a kid, that was a good motivator. But it's not a good move to go to tell somebody that before battle. Once again, not really just one of those useless bits of trivia that I read. The meals ready to eat, or MREs, that the soldiers carry, like our son Bradley, those things are like, 4,000 or 5,000 calories. Why? Because you burn enormous amounts of energy in combat. Well, Saul just told his people, you can't eat. You're not eating. And anybody that eats, we're going to kill. Well, Jonathan didn't know this, had no idea that this order was given out. So when Jonathan finishes this work, he eats him some honey. Well, Jonathan could have hidden it, could have done something else. But Jonathan is, as we know, a man of faith and principles. He's basically tells his father, the king, look what a little bit of honey has done for me. What do you think it's going to do? What do you think allowing our troops to eat is going to do for them? But you have said this. You have made this vow. Here I am. Put me to death. Put me to death. And it's just that but then the people said to Saul, down in verse 45, must Jonathan die, who has brought about this great deliverance in Israel? Far from it. As the Lord lives, not one hair of his head shall fall to the ground, for he has worked with God this day. So the people rescued Jonathan, and he did not die. Now, faith. We've talked about that. Maybe Jonathan was thinking that his father wouldn't kill him. But I think the scriptures are clear that he was willing to take that, willing to be a man of faith and of principles. My father, the king, has made kind of a silly, rash vow, but I'm not going to escape it, and therefore here I am. Do what you got to do. I have to admit, when I was reading this, I didn't remember some of these stories. I had to actually go back and look this up because, once again, you kind of Jonathan's kind of there in the background. He rescues David, tries to talk to Saul from killing David, and he's just kind of there as an extra. Like if you were watching the movie, he'd be kind of in the background, just an extra. But Jonathan is a three-dimensional person with a story and a life and character and things that are important for us. No, God is not going to tell us to go slaughter the Philistines tonight. But this is yet another example of faith. Faith that we all would do good to cultivate. Faith to encourage. Faith to strengthen. And faith, if necessary, to take the consequence. That is no fun. When you have messed up, owning it is really hard. I'll admit, I'm not as good at that. I'm not as good about that as I need to be. It's something I'm working on. If you know what a Coban board is, it's a big giant board. You got a bunch of stickers on it. You're working different kinds of things. Well, the Todd's Improvement Coban board is like huge. There's got lots and lots of projects that I got to work on, but neither here nor there. It's hard to imagine a death sentence over as trivial as eating a little honey. But that's what Jonathan was facing, and he did it with honor. Jonathan tried to help his father be an honorable person. After David defeated Goliath, Jonathan's father Saul became jealous and wanted him dead. Wanted David dead. The guy who just delivered you. Jonathan tried to keep peace and interceded for David on more than one occasion. By his actions in serving the Lord and by his faithfulness to God's will and to God's choice of David, Jonathan's name has forever been associated with honor and integrity. We all have family, and sometimes it's easier to go along with family just to keep from fighting. Fighting family is never fun because nobody wins. Whoever you think is winning has lost. It had been real easy for Jonathan to have sided with his dad. He was likely going to be king number 2. Now, he understood, he heard the prophecy, he knew that God had told Saul that the kingdom would be stripped from him. And it wasn't that Saul was stupid. Foolish, yes. Stupid, perhaps not. Because when you read what Saul is doing, at the time that he attempts to offer the sacrifice and is not prepared to do so, when you look at the place names that are in those verses, they're at the north of Israel. Saul's been pushed almost totally out of the kingdom. He's desperate, he's scared, his army is melting away by the day, and Samuel is late getting to him. Now, does that excuse the fact that he tried to offer sacrifice inappropriately? No. Was that against God's word? It absolutely was. Was he to be punished for it? Yes. But if you're desperate enough, your brain starts going in weird places. If you're scared enough, what do? What is anyone to do when things look absolutely bad? And that's a lesson, that's a negative lesson, but that's a lesson for us too. To try to trust in God, to try to reach out to the people around you, to try to not let yourself get into those situations. It's not easy. It's very difficult. It's very easy to get into a mess because you start going down a rabbit hole. But that's why we're to be family. And that's why we study, is to understand some of these things. 1 Samuel 19:1. Now Saul told Jonathan his son and all his servants to put David to death. But Jonathan, Saul's son, greatly delighted in David. Jonathan could have used his father's anger to promote himself. You know? If he sided with his father, he would have been king of the Jews. But Jonathan's love for David cost him the goodwill of his father and cost him the throne. Jonathan was able to do this because he recognized a couple of things. One, he recognized that the kingdom wasn't his to begin with. It wasn't his dad's to begin with. It was truly God's. And therefore, when God decided that the kingdom was to go to someone, not him, wasn't mine to begin with. I'll be honest with you. I try to have that attitude about money. Sometimes it doesn't always work. Sometimes I want to hold on to it. But the truth is, it's not my money. I didn't make it. I'm not owed it. I'm simply a steward. God has blessed me in multiple ways. I try to make the best use of the money when I can. But it's not mine. The kingdom wasn't Jonathan's, wasn't Saul's, it was God's. Jonathan was a hero for David and for Israel because Jonathan's hero was God. And, do we want to be someone's hero? We all do. We got a chance last weekend. There was a bunch of first responders down in Hurricane. They had a little thing set up, and we had William, number 3 grandson, and if you're old enough to remember Charlie Chan, number 1 son, number 2 son, well, that kind of how I feel sometimes as a grandson's keeping them all in order. We had William with us, and we went to go see all the first responders, and they're the people that putting their lives, they're the ones running into the burning building. They're the ones that are transporting, coming to help you when you're sick, when bad things have happened to you. They're protecting you when bad things are happening to you. But not all heroes get their picture on the front page of the paper. We had a coworker that got recognized today, in fact, because she saw a person outside. She was eating dinner someplace, and she saw a person outside in the cold. And she took this person some food and something to drink and took it to the side to kind of get out of the way of the restaurant so that this person wasn't in view of these people. Not because, oh, you're undesirable, but to give this person some dignity. And a coworker that was recognized for that. And I know this person, and that's who they are. That's the kind of person they are. It's kind of like saying, we're going to have a celebration because the sun rises. It's so intrinsic to that person, and that's the kind of people that we should be. Willing to help people, willing to be so invested. You know, not everybody gets on the front page of the paper. When we think of the hero of 1 Samuel, we think of David. You know, if you were capturing the newsprint, it would be David standing over Goliath. But the story of Jonathan is equally heroic. It's not easy to stand up to family. It's not easy to stand up and go into what is very likely a death sentence because it's the right thing to do. It is not easy to have enough faith to not hear the doubts in the back of your head when you're confronting something that looks to be almost impossible. You don't have to kill giants to be a hero. But to be a hero, Luke chapter 10, verse 27. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself. That is what Jonathan did. Sometimes serving in the shadows is a good thing. The spotlight has its distractions and its temptations. And we know that. We know that in our world. How many famous people have their lives blown up at the peak of success because of all of the distractions and temptations and everything? And pretty soon you start to thinking, well, I'm owed all this. I deserve all this. I'm worth all this. But are you? In the shadows, we can quietly do the work God has called us to do. It takes faith, honor, and love. Jonathan is not the first person we think of when we think of Bible heroes. But David likely would not have been the man after God's own heart if it hadn't have been for Jonathan. Don't be discouraged by your place in the shadows. Embrace it. The Lord is not restrained to save by many or by few. Yes?
You know, it's a very strong statement what Jonathan did here.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, you're only 2 chapters away from Goliath, the Philistines staring down the entire Israeli army. And I assume that Jonathan was there. So
He was.
What was the change of heart, change of mind, you know, in the span of time? There's a different circumstance. I mean, that's kind of an example
Yeah.
of this, too. That, you know, each time, each opportunity has its own set of circumstances. And sometimes we're fit for the task, and sometimes we're
Well, and that is kind of proof that the Bible is not a collection of mythological stories, but an actual account of events, because if this had been Hercules, he would have just, let's go do it. Jonathan, as much faith as Jonathan had, Goliath is scary. Absolutely terrifying. I mean, you know, when you see relatively large people, Dwayne Johnson, The Rock, I mean, he's a huge, impressive man. I mean, he's this giant. And Goliath was much bigger than him, proportionally built. Yao Ming, the basketball player, is really, really, really tall, but he's really, really, really thin. Well, Goliath was tall and big. Yes, absolutely. And This was not just a show demonstration. How many people had Goliath killed up to this point? I mean, it might have been one thing to say, okay, here's a big guy, but how well does he fight? Goliath probably had done enough work up to this point. I'm not sure that the scriptures truly tell us. But the point is that Goliath was what we would, in modern terms, call a credible threat. And yet Jonathan was like, man, I don't want any part of this. And then when David shows up and Saul's like, well, this kid's going to get himself killed. But if you're going to go, at least take my armor. And David's like, no, I can't do that. This doesn't fit. Armor is frequently like a spacesuit. One size fits one person. Yes.
Look at David as a shepherd.
Yeah.
He went out to get the lion and the bear.
Yeah.
So Goliath to him was just a big bear.
A big bear. Exactly. Absolutely. Goliath was just like another big bear. Big bear. But, yeah.
Also, in between these two events, God tells Samuel that he repents that he made Saul king.
Mm-hmm.
That he's not doing, he's turned his back on me.
Mm-hmm.
This is one of those very few times that we hear God say that he repented of something or he regretted
Yeah.
something. And so then Saul, gives lies to him about having killed everyone. And so Jonathan may have been a little bit persuaded by some of those things that he had seen and heard.
Yeah, I mean,
That maybe God wasn't going to be with him this next time.
it's certainly, it's difficult to know. Because the scriptures tell us what we need to know, not always what we want to know. Yes?
God gave him one.
Yeah?
The second time, God said no way.
No.
So he had a chance to have repented.
Yeah. Yep.
But when he went against God the second time, God said no.
And that is an important lesson. God does forgive us, and God gives us plenty of chances to forgive us. But sometimes some things are bad enough in the sense that if you turn your heart away from God, yes, you can be repented from that. But you don't ever seek it because you don't care anymore. You've turned away totally. Well, hopefully in the rest of the week, you'll think about living heroically, not in some great, magnificent way, but in a quiet way, in the shadows, trying to serve God faithfully wherever you're at, whatever you're capable of doing. Serving God faithfully is that act of living a life that matters. Thank you.